All right, I'm going to do this. We left off at chapter 10, which was Gods and Beasts, or sorry, it was the Black Knights. And we are on chapter 11, the Children's Crusade. And this is from, once again, this is The Nazis and the Occult by Dusty Sklar. That's not a pen name if I ever heard one. And this is from 1977. So I thought I'd come on today and read some of this book. I think the rise in the acceptance of Hitler as not being such a bad guy is really disturbing. And I think it's important to remember the Nazis and their dark occult roots. I think it's a very good entry point into a lot of fascism, because once you enter into the sort of new age dark occult, you feel as if you have knowledge that others do not, and you feel superior to others, even if you are not. And I believe that breeds fascism. I've been looking into Mussolini lately. I don't really know much about Italian fascism, even though the word comes from that. And it's interesting also, the Italians had definite links to the dark occult even before Mussolini rose to power. So that's interesting too. I posted a paper I found about that, tracing those links in my posts. But this is chapter 11, The Children's Crusade. I haven't done any prep for this. So I'll be looking up pictures as I come along or come across the people mentioned in the book. But the first quote here is from Hitler. So here he is. And quote, "My teaching is hard. Weakness has to be knocked out of them," right? So another aspect of fascism is that weakness is a sin, basically. Weakness has to be knocked out of them. In my Ordensbergen, a youth will grow up before which the world will shrink back. A violently active, dominating, intrepid, brutal youth. That is what I'm after. Youth must be all these things. It must be indifferent to pain. There must be no weakness or tenderness in it. I want to see once more in its eyes the gleam of pride and independence of the beast of prey. In this way, I shall eradicate the thousands of years of human domestication. Then I shall have in front of me the pure and noble natural material. With that, I can create the new order, right? Order out of chaos. It's all very satanic, right? And that is Adolf Hitler, a direct quote from him. 19th century German youth was not yet hard. It was innocent, and it usually belonged to one or another youth group, whether religious, athletic, nature, cultural, or a combination of these. Some of them built medieval castles in the air. They were all an expression of restlessness and bewilderment. And well, they might have been, for Germany, especially after World War I, was a place which was losing its hold on sense and purpose. Young people not only felt estranged from the government, but from adults in general. Does this sound familiar? We see all sorts of youth uprisings today on college campuses. I guess Donald Trump has gone hard on Harvard lately. And why shouldn't he? I think he should take away all of their funding until they stop supporting terrorists. Anyway, and I think that's very cut and dry matter. I really do. But as we know, the university system is an indoctrination factory into mostly leftist ideas. And they have an orthodoxy that you cannot speak out against. And indeed, they are, even though they feel as if they are on the left, they are the fascists of our time, because you cannot challenge their orthodoxy, and you are persona non grata. Let's see. Though the same could be said of youth throughout Europe, particularly in the middle class, the difference in Germany was that it did not, for the most part, attach itself to the liberal cause, the way youth movements elsewhere did. The German youth movement began at the end of the 19th century and was not at all political at first. It was a romantic protest against society in which young people were superfluous. Middle class youth had been educated and brought up to believe that they could claim their birthright on coming of age. Work and position would be theirs. In adolescence, they experienced the culture shock of Kafkaesque alienation. And I could argue that's every teenage experience, really. Um, I don't think these experiences are really all that unique. Meaningful work and the status that went with it were claimed by the lucky few. To the rest, young manhood ushered in a period of drift. The youth groups filled a vacuum. Everyone seemed to recognize that it was the end of an age and that the futility, and smallness which men now felt would not aid them in getting out of the snares of mechanized modern life. The youth groups, whatever their particular character, had certain things in common. They all promised liberation from artificiality, alienation, and sterility, and wholeheartedly opposed the bourgeois, which stood for everything that had failed them. Does any of this sound familiar? They brought back the romanticism of the Middle Ages. Wow, this is like, yeah, the history certainly does rhyme, doesn't it? Time may or may not be a flat circle. Its simple faith, loyalty, and high minded love contrasted with the impersonality and decadence around them. But it was not to be all feudal music and peasant crafts. The youth movement early on fell under the spell of third rate philosophers with extremist notions. Wow. We don't even have third rate philosophers these days. We just have idiots like Nick Fuentes and insane Tucker Carlson and crazy Candace Owens. Um, Men like the occultist Theodore Fritsch, the Orientalist Paul de Lagarde, and Julius Langben, who believed he had sufficient magical powers to exorcise the demons from Friedrich Nietzsche, then languishing in an asylum. So let's look up Julius Langben. Again, I didn't do any prep for this show today. So just bear with me here. Looks like maybe we've looked at him before. Here is Julius Langben. What is this picture? It's like looks shocked or something. Okay. And then we have we've talked about Theodore Fritsch before. And you might be wondering, why is Google now my homepage? Is because I'm doing part-time AI work and it's just a lot easier if Google is the set search engine. Anyway, there's Theodore Fritsch and Paul. We have Paul de Lagarde. Oh, wow. Is this really him? Oh, my goodness. I think a lot of these people were closet homosexuals. Is this really the same guy that we're talking about in this book? No, this is some French Paul Walter. Okay, I don't think that's the same guy. I think it's this guy. That looks more reasonable. Yeah, the German biblical scholar and Orientalist. Here he is. Here's Paul de Lagarde. I think I didn't switch tabs by accident. Okay, so let's leave it on. Let's go back to Julius Langben. Here's Julius Langben, German national romantic art historian and philosopher. And I guess he thought he had magical powers uh, to somehow help Nietzsche free himself from his inner demons. I don't think anyone could have done that. Um, Although I think Nietzsche is one of the most interesting philosophers and accessible ones to read. Fascinating stuff. And he distanced himself. It was really Nietzsche's sister that tied him to the Nazi movement. Racism became violent and brutal and mixed with occultism through the influence of men like Lanz von Liebenfels and Liszt. Lanz's comic book heroes appealed to the young. So let's see if we can find Lanz von Liebenfels comic book. Can we find that? I don't know. Maybe this is kind of it. This looks like a weird website. um, anyway, Lanz's comic book heroes appealed to the young. They were larger than life and boosted the adolescent egos of their German readers who could identify with their pure blooded rage against the despoilers of civilization. Liszt's fantasies were equally flattering. His glorification of Germanic history and deification of nature were bathed in the rosy glow of a sun, which symbolized hidden psychic powers. And if you study the dark occult or even just New Age philosophy, you'll find that there's a lot of sun worship that occurs throughout. As the historian George L. Moss made clear in the culture of Western Europe, quote, these men believed that their ideals possessed a tremendous magnetism for the hopeless, rationalistic world of the present. And, it's true when the world becomes too materialistic, too rational, let's say, people turn to strange avenues of spirituality um, because it gets bleak and they need something to believe in. Um, when instead they really should probably just accept Christ into their heart, but that's just my opinion. Some took to the spiritualism of Madame Blavatsky or to the fad for Oriental sects which promised nirvana from the present. The whole of Germany was swept up in this esoteric wave, and youth more than anyone. The peculiar the peculiarly sometimes I really can't say words, especially if there are that many L's. Let's just say strange. The strange 19th century phenomenon, spiritualism, and its more scientific variation, theosophy, in Germany were welded together with a mystical concept of the Volk as a people whose collective soul was more than the sum of its parts. This Aryan soul, Germans believed, united the individual German to his geographical place, right? Remember, it was like a month ago that we were reading this, but one of them had to import the soil over. Um, right? Every tree and rock of German soil was holy. And this is actually a lot of early folk religions. Shinto is like this too. Everything has a spirit, animistic kind of religions. So every tree and rock of German soil was holy and spoke to the people, shaping them and causing their creativity. The intuitive wisdom of which the Aryans rooted in their land were capable was hidden from the Jews, those eternal wanderers who had no organic place of their own and therefore tried to usurp the fatherland of others. On this account, the Jew was most comfortable in the city, alienated from nature and the Volk. Spiritualism joined itself to the idea of the Volk in that nature emitted a vital ether, right? So let's look up Volk, um, German. Let's just type in ether for fun. Getting some weird Bitcoin situations here. Um, Interesting. This looks like an interesting image. Let's just leave that up there for fun. Right, a vital ether, a life force, with which only the Aryan was in touch. He alone could contact an extrasensory world which would yield up its secrets and give him special powers. The new romanticism was, above all, irrational, and this seemed to guarantee its easy acceptance. It peddled itself as more substantial than the discoveries of science, because science itself did not claim to understand the dark mysteries of the force which drove nature, whereas Madame Blavatsky and others like her did. Liszt, borrowing her theosophy, also did. Her ancient wisdom transposed by him into Germanic wisdom which had been destroyed by Christianity, could be revived through intuition and would explain the essence of things. German mystics developed an ideology, a hodgepodge of the occult, and that's all occult practices in the West. It is a buffet of spiritual ideas that they take from Eastern religions mostly, um, and kind of transform them into their own purposes, right? So a hodgepodge of the occult, racism, and romanticism, which, while ridiculous, went down surprisingly well with youth hunting for certainties. Does this sound familiar? Many young people, Walter Z. Lacour points out in Young Germany, let's look up this guy if we can find him. Walter Z. Oh, good. It's filling it out for me. Look at this guy. He looks kind of smug. Um, so he points out in Young Germany that many young people joined one of the many new religious and occult sects whose profits grew like mushrooms in the Volkisch camp between the First and Second World War. Of such were Mathilde Ludendorff's, the general's wife's, Tannenberg Bund, Arthur Dinter's group, the Asgard Circle, and Gustav Müller's sect, which believed that the human soul was an amalgamation of 3 or 4 animal souls, according to reliable reports from beyond, that the planet Mars was the first place where man appeared. And I think I've said this before, but Elon Musk is heavily obsessed with Mars, and you have to wonder if there's some uh, background knowledge there of what the Nazis believed and being from Mars. And of course, Mars is the planet of war. So I guess it all checks out. I don't know who this, I've not ever looked at Matilda, Matilda Ludendorff. I don't think we've ever really looked at her. Oh, what's, what do you think those facial features are all about? Hmm. Looks like a creepy lady that would be in a horror movie. Anyway, she's in Baba Yaga. Uh, to children whose fathers had been killed in the war, the leaders of these groups became surrogates. To adolescents disturbed by a fragmented society, they offered solidarity. To students who knew that nothing awaited them upon graduation from school, they offered immersion in the group. To alienated youth drifting into dreary, unfriendly cities, they offered companionship. To young people bewildered by the intricacies of sex, they offered the solution of rigorous Puritanism. To children who could no longer believe in the God of their fathers, they offered a new modern God, which I had underlined the first time I read this because I think that's kind of important, right? When you turn away from Christ, when you turn away from Christianity, you can fall into all of these pitfalls of new modern gods that are offered to you through various, like I said, avenues of occult belief. To those thirsting for absolute meanings, they provided absolute answers. As one participant put it in E.Y. Hartshorne's German Youth and the Nazi Dream of Victory, quote, mysticism and everything mystical had dominion over us. It was our ranks that the word Führer originated, with its meaning of blind obedience and devotion. The word Bund arose with us too, with its mysterious undertone of conspiracy. And I shall never forget how in those early days we pronounced the word Gemeinschaft, community, with a trembling, throaty note of excitement as though it hid a deep secret. He goes on more objectively. The tragedy of the appeal of this mysticism to the youth of the post-war period was that it offered them a dreamy haven of refuge from the pressing problems of the day, right? Escapism. Transgenderism is much like this, right? Instead of facing reality or coping with certain feelings of being disconnected from your body, you create a whole fantasy reality for yourself. And I think conspiracy theorists do the same thing. A significant proportion of cultured idealistic youth was thus, for years on end, and at the most impressionable stage, withdrawn from the tasks of their time and estranged. Instead of learning to see things as they were and freeing themselves from the dangerous tradition of German escape idealism, they became victims of a deceptive mysticism which made them easy victims for the National Socialists. Furthermore, by yielding to the lure of this mysticism, toward which an attitude of rational criticism was sure to mean angry expulsion from the group, these boys lost all capacity for criticism. At a time when the blind obedience of the soldier was regarded as unworthy of rational men, they adopted the habit of a far more sinister obedience, the servile subordination of the mind under the yoke of an ideology. The divine essence, or elan vital, or life force, or vril. I don't know why, but that always cracks me up. I think I spelled it wrong. Vril, life force. Let's see what kind of fun images Google gives us for that. What is this? Oh my goodness. All right, let's just leave that up there. Vril was believed to be electromagnetic, theozoological in Lanz's terminology. Since the sun was the repository of this energy, it became the fashion for German youth groups, as for occult groups generally, to adopt the emblem of the swastika, a symbol of the sun. And they also, you have that famous black sun image that you might see in certain Twitter profiles these days. The festival of the changing sun, an old pagan ritual, was given a new occult twist by the Sarah Circle, in that the cosmic rays were thought to emit esoteric knowledge along with warmth. Liszt's Armageddon believed that the solar symbol held the key to an ancient secret science, and that by communing with the ghostly spirits present in certain Germanic ruins, mysterious veils of the past would be lifted. When I read this, I often think they were communicating directly with demons, and that's partially why their plans were so sinister and evil, because demons may or may not have been running the show. Hello, Terry Strange. How are you doing? Aryan means Martian. Yeah, so they thought that the Germanic people came from Mars originally. Aryan witches out here luge farming their vril pagans. That other picture, right? I guess that's like what this is kind of evoking. Where was I? The cosmic circle practiced pagan rituals intended to arouse the life force and awaken clairvoyant powers in people of Germanic blood. In their songs and dances, the groups tried to recreate the primordial kinship with nature which they supposed ancient man to have had, right? A hallmark of fascism is the romanticization of the past. They abhorred science and reasons as enemies of life, of the life of the soul. Um, Many of them became vegetarians, right? And teetotalers, right? They didn't drink. And I think actually not drinking is probably a very good thing. I don't know about the vegetarian part. I was in Terry's stream last night, and we were talking about vegans. And someone was kind of getting it twisted that like we were saying we hated vegans when really we were just like kind of concerned for their health and well-being. I don't know who that person was, but they didn't seem to have much of a sense of humor. Um, Anyway, so they became, what they thought would be purifying for them. They believed that the purification of the physical body would help the soul to see reality. And that actually might be true. Um, when I was completely sober and running about 3 times a week, and I've said this before, I had mental clarity unlike I've ever really had since. I'd like to get back to that routine. I think I'm slowly getting there. They threw over orthodox medicine for spiritual and herbal healing, which were somehow felt to be closer to the primal source. The youth movement in Germany was essentially conservative because it stressed the importance of the link with the past, not with the traditions of one's parents and grandparents, but with the rights of one's remote ancestors. We'll just put the black sun back up there. While communist youth was being taught to believe in a classless society in which the individual was subordinated to the state, Volkish youth was being taught that the Aryan individual was bound to the state through hereditary ties. So both believe, and they're really two sides of the same coin, both believe in very big government, right? Both believe that its citizens are subordinate to government and that the government is the be all end all of everything. So fascism and communism are similar in many ways. That peasantry and rulers were one folk, and each had his proper place in the hierarchy. The peasantry was rhapsodized over and imitated in dance, song, and dress as being organic folk. But, like the communists, Volkish youth held the bourgeois to be contemptible, the source of all misery. After World War I, the German youth movements took on more and more character of the anti-Semitic societies, seeing the Jew as the exemplar of the bourgeois. Little by little, Jewish youth was excluded from membership in youth organizations. At the same time that they were practicing spirituality through vegetarianism and abstinence from sex, boys and girls were being encouraged by leaders like de Lagarde, Langben, Chamberlain, and Fritsch to extol force, as the Crusaders had done, in a holy war against the enemies, Freemasons, liberals, and Jews. The politicization of the youth movement came just after World War I, when the paramilitary Freikorps attracted many former members to pass them on in turn to the Nazi Party, and in some cases the SS. Their education in obedience, discipline, selfless service to an ideal, romanticism, and the occult in a patriarchy where fathers had been taken away to war helped make the transition easy, and they were eager to follow the Fuhrer wherever he might lead. As one Volkish youth put it, quote, one often hears the question why it was that the youth spontaneously rallied to Hitler, but the experiences of war, revolution, and inflation supply an explanation. We were not spared anything. We knew and felt the worries in the house. The shadow of necessity never left our table and made us silent. We were rudely pushed out of our childhood and not shown the right path. Wah, wah, wah. Wow. Ugh, this sounds like some self-victimization. Listen, it's hard for everybody, I don't know. There are very few people that have that dirty privilege word, but there are very few people that have that in life. And that's what makes America a decent place, right? There is upward mobility if you do the right things and you make good choices. I truly believe that. The struggle for life got to us early. Misery, shame, hatred, lies, and civil war imprinted themselves on our souls and made us mature early. So we searched and found Adolf Hitler. What attracted us like a magnet was precisely the fact that he only made demands of us and promised us nothing. He demanded of every person a total commitment to his movement and therefore to Germany. German youth had always been highly organized. In the Weimar Republic, some 4.5 million boys and girls under 21 were members of organizations connected with the National Board of German Youth Associations. Under Hitler, the youth movement became a holy crusade. By the end of 1934, the Hitler Youth included 6 million members, ranging in age from 10 to 18. Membership in other youth organizations was officially discouraged and disintegrated under pressure. Parents and church groups were in jeopardy if they failed actively to support Hitler Youth, so that eventually all the young in Germany, according to the contemporary observer Stephen H. Roberts, were, quote, stamped into the same mold and emerged as unquestioning automata, physically fit and mentally sponges for the official Hitler hero worship, with the slogan, "Command and we follow. The standard is more than death," end quote. The brainwashing actually began in the cradle. Even the fairy tales read to babies instilled the propaganda that the Führer had been sent from heaven to kill the wicked enemy who was eager to devour little children. Wow. This reminds me of how Palestinian children are taught through children's programming. If you've never seen that memory TV stuff where they show the children's programming in Palestine, you should watch it sometime. The ideological training Hitler decreed was to bring up that unspoilt generation which will consciously find its way back to primitive instinct. Fairy tales were saturated with struggle and race as a childhood means of education to a heroic view of the world and of life. One volume was titled People Fight. The Robinson Crusoe age groups were taught, quote, from an early age, youth must be able to face a time when it may be ordered not merely to act, but also to die. It must simply learn to think like our ancestors again. A man's greatest honor lies in death before the enemy of his country, end quote. Hitler Youth sang, God is struggle, and struggle is our blood, and that is why we were born. A book of tales published for them in 1935 gave them the battle cry, no one shall live after the leader's death. And indeed, when Hitler realized he was losing the war, he ordered his own people to be massacred, which one of the guys went against that. I forget. That was like months ago that we read that, but you can look back through the archive if you'd like. The system of indoctrination was perfect. At 10, each boy joined the young folk, and each girl the Union of German Maidens. They received uniforms and took a pledge to devote their lives to the Führer. His will was to be their will. Hitler knew well how to accomplish this. This youth, let's put Hitler back up here. Let's put him back up. This youth learns nothing else than to think German, to act German, and if these boys enter our organization at the age of 10, then 4 years later they come from the young folk into Hitler Youth, and we keep them there for another 4 years. And then we certainly don't give them back to the hands of the originators of our old classes and estates, but take them straight into the party, into the Labor Front, the SA or the SS, the NSKK, and so on. And if they are there for another 2 years or a year and a half and still haven't become complete National Socialists, then they go into the labor service and are polished for another 6 or 7 months, all with a symbol, the German spade. And any class consciousness or pride of status that may be left here and there is taken over by the Wehrmacht for further treatment for 2 years, And when they come back after 2, 3, or 4 years, we take them straight into the SA, SS, and so on again, so that they shall in no case suffer a relapse, and they don't feel free again as long as they live. And if anyone says to me, yes, but there will always be a few left over, National Socialism is not at the end of its days, but only at the beginning. End quote. The child who was willing to assert himself as a leader in this system no longer had to worry about his future. He knew that he could rise to the top of an elitist cult. His family usually did not object out of fear, ambition, or ignorance. Many did not realize, and I don't actually buy that. I don't buy the ignorance part. I think they all knew, and the human psyche is a very interesting thing, and I think above all else in these kinds of situations goes for how can I survive, right? I don't think they were ignorant. Many did not realize until too late that a dreadful Pied Piper had taken their children away from them. Hitler himself remarked that it was a quite special secret pleasure to see how the people around us fail to realize what is really happening to them. Not every child throve under the training program. The more intelligent and individualistic must have found it unbearable to be watched like prisoners. Innocuous conversations were recorded by eavesdroppers. True friendship was impossible because everyone was afraid to say what they really thought. One labor service inmate described what conversation inevitably was. It says, camp conversations would begin somewhat in this fashion, when one was fairly sure of being able to trust the other person. He says, the camp's fine, isn't it? Yes, very, with emphasis on the word very. I wrote here, it sounds like corporate America. There's such a friendly spirit, don't you think? Such spontaneous camaraderie. Yes, and such excellent leadership, isn't there? Yes, I'm thankful to be able to share such a valuable experience and to see eye to eye with my leaders. This is so much like emails that people write these days. All these fake platitudes. Um, what's going on in the chat? Isn't that funny? The Nazi youth sound just like corporate America. We got Terry. Terry says, I don't hate vegans. I was just talking about how they were anti-human philosophy rampant amongst their community. Yeah. I don't know. I think that person was kind of taking it the long way. What's going on, Roberta Glass and Pinocchio's helicopter? Whining like Gen X about their boomer parents. Like, get over it. Everyone's saying hi. How nice. Getting your vril on. Your life essence. They had a Palestinian dumbass at our Christmas. I saw that. The Portland Christmas tree lighting was politicized for some reason. Asking people to chant Free Palestine. It's disgusting. It's absolutely vile. It's such a subversion. It's very satanic, in my opinion. I think Islam is the most satanic religion out there, next to, pure Satanism. Plus a land acknowledgement, which I don't care as much about. Whatever. It is what it is. I think a lot of this stuff is what it is, and people just can't move on and accept that these things have happened, whether or not they were good or bad, Just keep going. All right, so let me continue. But most young people succumb to the brainwashing, even if their inclinations went counter to Nazi dogma. One young teacher, the daughter of a liberal professor, joined the party under pressure. It says, at first, I just made myself do it. The Nazi accounts were so fantastic, plots of world Jewry, etc., that I could hardly keep from laughing as I read them. But of course, I had to be careful. It was somewhat of a shock to find how readily the children accepted these Nazi fabrications. But the most amazing thing of all was that after a few years of going through the routine, I began to believe the stories myself and can no longer distinguish in my own mind between the propaganda and the truth. Paragraph 2 of the law relating to Hitler Youth read that, quote, all young Germans in the Reich area are, except in the parental home and at school to be physically, mentally, and morally reared in the spirit of National Socialism for service to the nation and the national community in the Hitler Youth. For most young people, there was little resistance. The enthusiasm for the Fuhrer canceled out all other interests. Even when church groups or parents pleaded with children to keep away from the Hitler Youth, their hearts and souls had been captured by the uniforms, the fife and drums, and the example of their peers, so that not to be included in the Fuhrer's glorious movement became the worst kind of punishment, right? And again, that's the taking advantage of this need within the human psyche to feel a sense of belonging. Um, they do this all the time. Just look at what happened during 2020. The generation gap became a battle for the mind in some families, where parents who opposed the regime found it impossible to express their ideas to their idolatrous children. Parents rejecting Nazi dogma while their children shifted loyalty to the family, from loyalty to the family to loyalty to the party, right? And we see this in the trans madness too. We see this in a lot of youth movements, protests, movements, right? If your family doesn't agree with you, ditch them, get a new family, your found family, right? Cults do the same thing. I mean, it's all a cult at the end of the day, isn't it? A cult, a cult, a cult of a cult. Anyway, they must have experienced great pain. In many households, one's offspring became one's worst enemy. It was not at all uncommon for children to denounce their parents as traitors to the state. Children worshiped the Fuhrer as a god. To be singled out to see him and speak to him was to be elevated to demigod. The training fostered this kind of fanaticism, while at the same time discarding intellectual inquiry. Philosophy was held to be morbid. Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree. Universal education was, according to Hitler, the most corrosive and disintegrative poison ever devised by liberalism, right? Let me read that again because there are a lot of people that might need to hear this. Universal education was, according to Hitler, the most corrosive and disintegrative poison ever devised by liberalism. And I totally disagree. I really dislike people that have such a strong distaste for public education. I think it's very important to teach people how to read, write, and do basic arithmetic. The problem is that it's not happening. And there are a lot of things we can talk about within education, but it's because we abandoned things that we knew worked. We made policy changes that were ridiculous, okay? And we have no standards anymore. So that's just my 2 cents on the state of public education. But I think it's important. And I think I'm not one of these people that decries public schooling. Anyway, because a literate population is an intelligent one. And that's the other problem. We're moving into a world of illiteracy, a world no longer based in logos, right? No longer based on the word, but now it's image based. And these images can now be manipulated through AI and other means to make everything is now questionable. You have to question everything you see. Is this something that's real? It makes me want to check out and live in a cave or something. I have some Nietzschean urges. Each stratum of society needed to learn what was necessary for its particular purposes and nothing more. All education was to be under constant surveillance and with the broad mass of the lowest class receiving the blessings of illiteracy. Hitler was right. His pedagogy was hard, not only for German youth, but for all mankind. He took the prevailing knowledge about mass propaganda techniques and applied them zealously. Almost every moment in the youth camps was regimented. The mind was led step by step through intensive drill to accept Nazi principles. The days were long and active, and the political indoctrination was particularly effective when minds were tired. Without physical force, then, youth was brainwashed from 5:45 a.m. to 9:30 p.m. with lectures on the healthy family, the healthy nation, hereditarily diseased offspring, Germanic civilization, and Lebensraum theories instilled along with a love of heroism, toughness, silence, and loyalty, and above all, a contempt for weakness. By these tactics, the Nazis created a generation of youth so brutalized that they were capable of roaring with hysterical laughter while watching civilians in occupied countries being executed, and when they ran out of civilians, hanging kittens from a miniature gallows. A British soldier writing home remarked, quote, "It is not even organized terrorism, but cruelty and bestiality practiced for its own sake, the worst offenders being German boys between the ages of 16 and 18." End quote. Another observer, a Swiss who lived in Germany in 1943, noticed in these boys, quote, "an acquired military rigidity together with a quivering nervousness, bright laughter side by side with desperate seriousness, and a self-assured grown-up manner alternating with childish, uncontrollable behavior." The boys he was describing were 10 to 18 years old. The impact of the hate training is brought home dramatically when we realize that these young hoods, when captured in the war, refused blood transfusions if they could not be certain of the donor's racial purity, preferring to die instead. And I really think this is what aided in their loss. Okay, because I think they could have won maybe, but because first of all, everything was so racially charged, it led to their demise. And they believed so heavily in the occult that they didn't invest in other technologies that the Allied powers were investing in because they were too afraid that the V2 rockets were going to bounce off the freaking, oh my God, what is it? The thing above the earth that the flat earthers believe in. Right? They were too worried. They invested all of their time and energy into these ridiculous occult practices, and they lost. And I think that also has something to do with God, perhaps. That's just me and my opinions about this whole situation. What is up, GM Car? DeJean Paul's still lurking. Jamie Russell is here. Yeah, the kittens part is very disturbing. And, that's a telltale sign of psychopathy in youth when they hurt animals. And so what this book is saying is that psychopathy was institutionalized within the Nazi party. And they knew that they had to go after the youth. And I've said this many times, because revolution is for the youth. You have to be idealistic. You have to be unaware of the real world. And that you can only be young, I think, or really just truly a true believer of some ideology. Okay. When they were questioned by the Allies about the atrocities, they shrugged off their responsibility. Quote, "I saw women and children killed, but did not pay any attention to it. I have no opinion. I obey." By Nazi standards, their education had been perfect. All morality and intelligence had been propagandized out of them. Before Hitler came, Germany had been one of the most respected countries in the world for its high standard of education. By February 11th of 1941, the illiteracy that Hitler prized was an accomplished fact. And that's a scary idea because we're getting there right now, whether it be by design or not. We are facing a wave of illiteracy and a wave of people not understanding how to do basic mathematics. If you look, there's a story recently, I think it was out of maybe the University of Southern California, was having to offer remedial math courses to recent college students. Like, that is insane. That is crazy. And it is because we've lowered our standards to absolutely nothing. And we don't kick kids out, and there are no repercussions for failure because there has to be some rigor, right? The Nazis took it too far in one direction, but students do need guidance and boundaries and rigor. Anyway, and we're losing it, and it's bad. Anyway, the illiteracy that Hitler prized was an accomplished fact. According to an official press account which reported, apprentices not only seem unable to spell properly, but also fall far below the old standards in arithmetic. As a recent examination for 179 apprentices, 94 spelled names without capital letters and 81 misspelled Goeth's name in 17 different ways. And this is exactly what I'm seeing in the United States right now as a teacher. It's upsetting. After the war, the Allies were worried about how to rehabilitate those morally depraved youngsters. A German teacher provided a solution. Why do we conquer such distant foreign lands if, in so doing, we must have untilled the field of our own children's souls, which is close at hand? Never mind textbooks. The first job will be to teach these youngsters how to love. Love was something Himmler actually tried to instill in youth, though not in the sense that the teacher meant it. Departing from the Puritanism of the earlier youth movement, he urged that the mating of vigorous young males with healthy females was so important to the future of the Aryan race that procreation was no longer a private matter, but a duty to the state. Irresponsible youth was encouraged to produce children out of wedlock, and unwed mothers were elevated to hitherto undreamed of heights. Although abortions for adult women almost disappeared, in 1940 there were less than a third of what there had been in 1931, abortions for 14 and 15-year-old girls rose, as did the incidence of pregnancies. Secret reports dealt with homosexuality among the Hitler youth, which officials blamed on the old youth group past of many members and leaders when a homoerotic ideal had been fostered. I think the Nazis were secretly very homosexual, but that's just my 2 cents. You have all those famous pictures of them cross-dressing after all. One of Himmler's major preoccupations was the question of how to produce more male children to make up for those killed in the war. He had heard there was a custom in the Swabian Alps of a man abstaining from alcohol for a whole week, going for a 20-kilometer walk in the early afternoon, and copulating with his wife on return. She had done nothing but sleep and eat wholesome food for the week. This was believed to bring about the birth of a male child. Himmler asked an SS doctor to comment, but he never got an answer. Himmler dreamed up, let's look up Himmler real quick while we're talking about him. Like I said, I didn't prepare. I didn't prepare for this at all. Look at that smug Himmler. Himmler dreamed up Lebensborn, a chain of maternity homes which looked after unwed mothers and provided foster homes for illegitimate babies. He believed the organization would result in several thousand more choice births annually. Every SS officer had to join it and support it with his dues, 5 to 8% of his salary. See, they believe in taxes. And I honestly, sometimes I read some of the things. I don't think this sounds like the worst idea, And of course, it's dangerous to even say that, but overall, yes, very evil. Other SS men were not forced to become members. Himmler believed that Nietzsche's Superman could be attained by means of breeding, and warned his men that without multiplying our blood, we shall not be able to maintain the great Germanic Empire that is in the process of coming into existence. He encouraged his valuable and racially pure men to become conception assistants. Oh my gosh, the wording, conception assistant. Hi, ma'am, I'm your conception assistant. To become conception assistants and overcome their bourgeois qualms about fathering children out of wedlock. Lebensborn, he said, was a unique phenomenon and can be the basis for a new advance of the German race. He tried to create the impression that he was learned in genetics. Kind of sounds like a Jeffrey Epstein, huh? Citing the marvelous authority of German folklore. He theorized that when conception took place in a Nordic cemetery, babies inherited the spirit. Himmler was the one with the soil where, they'd have to bring the soil from where they were born and do these rituals with the soil. Nordic cemetery babies inherited the spirit of all the dead heroes who lay therein. Lists of such cemeteries were published regularly in the SS periodical Das Schwarze Korps. One English wag, on learning of this, punned one night say that these lists gave a new ring to the phrase poking about in the graveyards. Himmler must have been disappointed with the total output of new beings at Lebensborn. In 1938, 2 years after the program officially started, the 7 Lebensborn homes accepted only 653 mothers, 40% of the applicants who had applied. Racial requirements were so exacting that the majority were turned away. Right? So even the majority of Germany wasn't racially pure enough for them. In 1939, however, there were homes in Steinhorning, Polsen, Klosterheide, Hohenhorst, and in the Vienna woods. Later, more hospitals, children's homes, and sanatoria were being added from former Jewish properties. Directing officers were set up in Brumberg, as well as in Belgium and Holland. But for all that, after 9 operational years, the official figures for birth at Lebensborn were recorded at 12,000, of which half were illegitimate. Louis Hagen, in Follow My Leader, reports one Lebensborn mother as saying, quote, "At the Tegernsee hostel, I waited until the 10th day after beginning of my period and was medically examined. Then I slept with an SS man who had to perform his duty with another girl." This is so gross. When pregnancy was diagnosed, I had the choice of returning home or going straight into a maternity home. The birth was not easy, but no good German woman would think of having artificial injections to deaden the pain. Right? It's also a masochistic society. Girls considered it an honor to be chosen. One maiden announced proudly to fellow passengers on a train, "I'm going to the SS Ordensburg in Sonthofen to have myself impregnated." Naturally, young girls in the Hitler Youth were encouraged to try motherhood. Rewards were exemption from labor service and financial bonuses. One labor service internee wrote to her fiancé, quote, "The first question they ask a labor service girl is, 'Who's going to have a baby for the Fuhrer?' Then the girls go into a camp and have to stay there for a year. First be used by SS men, then stay for a year and have a child. If you do all right, they slip you RM Reichsmarks 1,000 and let you go." Never mind, I take that back. This is terrible. The leaders of the camps gave their blessings for these liaisons. One wrote, and it actually, to interrupt myself again, it reminds me again of Epstein's Zorro Ranch, in which he really did want to create some kind of breeding factory. And Elon Musk also, who has children with quite a few different women that they've used surrogacy. They want to pass on their superior seed. It's pretty gross. It's pretty gross stuff. The leaders of the camps gave their blessings to these liaisons. One wrote to the mother of a pregnant girl to bring the glad tidings that she was soon to present the Fuhrer with a child. If parents did not particularly care for this manner of bestowing gifts, there was nothing they could do. As one labor service inmate cautioned her family, "You better not beat me if I come home with a baby, or I'll denounce you." To get the right kind of offspring, Himmler even ordered the kidnapping of racially pure children from occupied countries. Thus, the methodical indoctrination of a whole nation with a conglomeration of irrational ideas, mystical, occult, racist, and anti-human, led to the roboticization of the German people, particularly the young, who were most susceptible. As J.G. Siebert in The Remaking of German Youth remarks, quote, "The reason why German youth allowed itself to be tricked lies in the fact that it had itself submitted to self-escapement." Okay, keep this in mind when we're talking about young people of today, right? Self-escapement, fantasy, a removal from reality. Irrationalism and mysticism that it had willingly given away its rational powers and its will to independent action. It had given up mastery over itself, and when the Nazis fell upon it with their demagoguery, it became an easy victim. In a relatively short time, the good effects of civilization had been bred out of them, and they had shown themselves capable of performing the most atrocious deeds without any pangs of conscience. Should I continue? Maybe I'll read to you. I did title this Monday Marathon. Let me see if you guys are active. I might get myself something to drink. Yeah, Joy Division. Indeed. I was thinking Elon Musk, not one massive weirdo that doesn't bring eugenics into it. I had someone criticize me for even saying that. The fan worship of Elon Musk is kind of out of this world. Poor little racially pure children without a nice family to be raised in. Oh my goodness. Let me get some water. We'll read the next chapter and then I don't know. Thank you, all 5 people who are here. I hope everybody had a nice holiday if they celebrated it. I had a really nice one. Went up to the Philadelphia area. I did take some shorts of the buildings around there. I miss it sometimes, but the liberal policies of being soft on crime have really ruined that city. And so hopefully there's some kind of backlash or turnaround. I don't see it happening because all of that stuff is really entrenched there. But I don't know. I still had a really nice holiday, and um, it was the first time I attempted to make a pie crust, and I thought it turned out pretty well. And I made some sweet potato pie, and I've come to really enjoy sweet potatoes even more than pumpkin. Because if you're doing pumpkin pie from scratch with like a real pumpkin, you have to like cut it open and take out all the goop and the seeds and all that. Whereas the sweet potatoes, you can either boil them or bake them, and it's a lot easier of an operation. And I find the taste to be pretty similar. Like, I don't think it's that different. So I agree that Elon Musk is an effing dork for sure. So let's do chapter 12, Prophets of the Third Reich. Let's type in German astrology. I really hate having Google as my main search engine, but like I said, I'm doing this AI job part-time right now, and it kind of helps out. Here's some German looking, I don't know, first half of the 16th century. All right, Prophets of the Third Reich, chapter 12. Awareness of one's national heritage and blood ties with the Aryan race are indivisibly bound up with astrological science. German astrological magazine. Okay. Astrology is one aspect of the occult tradition with which the Nazis have been openly identified. It is an important part of that tradition. According to astrological theory, the harmony of nature expressed in the planetary movements is the same as that expressed in individual personalities and societies. Therefore, the past, present, and future can be interpreted by certain cyclic and numerical calculations of heavenly bodies. If the occultist argues the human temperature is lower in the morning, why may we not observe distinct differences between different periods, people, and races, since they too follow certain periods. Occultists are particularly fond of the law of correspondences, exemplified by the saying attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, as above, so below. They see a reciprocal relationship between the microcosm and the macrocosm, the stars providing a language by which life can be read, a symbolic master plan of the hierarchical cosmos, and one of the purposes of the occult, as they perceive it, is to give men the wisdom to free themselves from bondage to the fortune in their stars. Through special knowledge, they believe they can develop the psychic powers to influence events. To understand astrology is to be able to use a kind of mental alchemy by which the negative aspects of life can be transmuted into good, if one is properly initiated, of course. From the late 19th century on, the Germans were eager to use astrology in their daily lives. They had been particularly impressed with Franz Anton Mesmer's, right? Mesmerism. Okay, so let's look him up. Franz Anton Mesmer. Here he is. He's like a tiny little man face. So they were interested in this guy's attempts to place astrology on a specific footing. An Austrian who had studied medicine in Vienna, he applied his theory of animal magnetism to heavenly bodies in his first book, De Influxu Planetarium in Corpus Humanum, or of the influence of the planets on the human body. The universe he described was held together by an etheric continuum, of which the stars and planets were a constituent part, and from which flowed animal magnetism. Illness was simply a failure to draw effectively on one's etheric continuum reserves, and Mesmer's apparatus was designed to help people tap this source, this intangible, universal force which pervaded space and exercised a hidden influence on human affairs. So Mesmer device. It was like all magnets and stuff. Yeah. Let's look at this. Let's check this image out. Mesmer learned of the researches of Empress Maria Theresa's court astrologer, who enjoyed amazing luck in treating the ill on the basis of Paracelsus's theory of correspondences or sympathies. What the court astrologer did was to apply magnets to the affected part of the patient's body. Mesmer broadened this theory. Animal magnetism was more widely practiced by doctors in Germany than anywhere else in Europe, as the eminent turn-of-the-century British clergyman Frank Podmore observed in his book, From Mesmer to Christian Science. There was no centralized medical academy to impose its rules on the profession. Mesmerism was studied in the German universities. Court physicians and medical professors wrote learned treatises on it. Experiments were repeated endlessly. Podmore reported, quote, "The magnetic fluid could be seen radiating as a stream of light from the eyes and the fingers of the operator and the poles of a magnet, from the heart of a living frog, or the spinal marrow of a newly killed ox." German magnetists threw themselves enthusiastically into clairvoyance since the animal fluid could magnetize over space, many instances of extrasensory communications were noted. According to Podmore, quote, "Clairvoyance at a distance was apparently much more common in Germany and Northern Europe generally at this time than in France. The cases quoted are rarely, however, recorded with sufficient detail to serve any purpose other than that of attesting to the prevalence of the belief, and some of the instances are strongly suggestive of collusion." Right? In fact, it was Houdini, I think, that was one of these people who sought to debunk all of these people. The special contribution of the German nation, however, to the early history of animal magnetism consists of the revelations concerning the spiritual world dictated by several somnambules in the state of ecstasy. Such interests flourish in cataclysmic times and are exploited by adventurers like Madame Blavatsky. So we've talked about her before. Let's just get a picture of Miss Helena Blavatsky. Inspired by her challenge to Darwinianism, other occult leaders copied her peculiar package, so satisfying to educated people who were not prepared to gainsay the findings of science, yet were not prepared to give up the mysteries of religion either. Scientific theory was not so well understood by the layman that it could hold its own against Madame Blavatsky's fanciful ramblings. In her variation of the Eastern doctrine of human cycles, she read the Atlantean zodiacal record and predicted the end of certain races whose time was up. When I originally wrote this, I wrote WTF next to that. Men like Lanz von Liebenfels, Guido von List, and the master astrologer Rudolf von Sembotendorf elaborated on this, and German astrology became intimately bound up with racism. Its ideologists borrowed heavily from Madame Blavatsky to show that the ancient Germans had been keepers of a secret science which had been wiped out by Judeo-Christianity. Lanz and Sembotendorf read in the movement of the planets the coming of a divine Führer who would establish a racist regime. List, in his book Die Religion der Aryo-Germanen in ihrer Esoterik und Exoteric, or The Religion of the Aryan Germans in its esoteric and exoteric aspects, revealed that, quote, the secret that the moon was the forefather of the human race and that the swastika was one of the holiest secret signs. List believed that the mystery of the heavens would be revealed by departed spirits in an extrasensory way. The effect of World War I was to intensify German interest in animal magnetism, theosophy, and astrology. Inflation drove some suicide and others to the sure knowledge contained in the horoscopes. The German astrologer Wilhelm Wolff reports in his book, Zodiac and Swastika. Let's look him up. Wilhelm Wolff. All these guys really crack me up, man. Like the way they look. Okay. He wrote, by the November Revolution of 1918, inflation was making headway, well-established businesses were crashing, and suicides were a daily event. In this period of tremendous economic and political uncertainty, again, does this sound familiar at all? Hypnosis, mesmerism, clairvoyance, and every form of occultism flourished. Such interests are promoted by catastrophic situations. In post-war Germany, hypnotists, clairvoyants, and mind readers were suddenly able to fill huge concert halls. And I wrote, again, escapism. There was scarcely a single large music hall or cabaret that did not stage a telepathic act. Enormous placards and newspaper advertisements pompously proclaimed the most important parapsychologist, the woman with 1,000 eyes, Madame Caroli at the Bush Circus, the great enigma and outstanding achievement in the sphere of occult science, the lady who tells you all, etc. Swindle or not, both public and press found it all fascinating. I was very soon revolted by this fairground occultism. Conrad Hayden adds this personal observation of the same period. So let's look him up. Conrad. Okay. He says, the churches raged, but if one had accused these astrologers, quacks, necromancers, and fake radiologists of witchcraft and sorcery,
Most of them would have replied indignantly that they occupied themselves with science, naturally, a science that the experts did not understand, for it was the science of the future, perhaps a science predicted on experiments that were still imperfect. There was much talk of intuition, of presentiment, of what they called vision and the like, but nearly always it was considered an advance by abnormally endowed natures into certain fields of the spirit that in the near future would be investigated by conventional methods. The stock explanation in that world of deception and self deception was that everything was done along strictly scientific lines, which shows to what extent the cult of science had taken the place of religion. One magus, Eric Jan Hanussen, who received the notoriety as the prophet of the Third Reich and the magician of Berlin, was credited with having taught Hitler all he knew about mass psychology. So let's look Eric up. Eric Jan. I don't know why they're always cracking me up so much. Oh my goodness. Can you even imagine? Anyway, uh, he was credited with having taught Hitler all he knew about mass psychology, which was considerable. Walter Langer, a psychiatrist, wrote in his secret report to the Allies, quote, according to Strasser, during the early 1920s, Hitler took regular lessons in speaking and in mass psychology from a man named Hanussen, who was also a practicing astrologer and fortune teller. And that makes a lot of sense to me because the thing with those people and the way that they make people believe is the confidence, right? It's always a confidence game. And if you can speak with enough confidence in your words and you act like you know what you're talking about, then a lot of people will believe you. Okay, so he was an extremely clever individual who taught Hitler a great deal concerning the importance of staging meetings to obtain the greatest dramatic effect. It is impossible that it is possible that he had some contact with a group of astrologers referred to by von Weigand, who were very active in Munich at this time. Though through Hanussen, Hitler too may have come in contact with this group. For von Weigand writes, when I first knew Adolf Hitler in Munich in 21 and 22, he was in touch with a circle that believed firmly in the portents of the stars. There was much whispering of the coming of another Charlemagne and a new Reich. Taking some water here. Okay. Born Herschel Steinsteiger in Vienna in 1889, Hanussen pretended to be descended from a long line of Danish noblemen, although his father actually was a small-time Jewish vaudevillian. The son followed in the dancing footsteps of the father and joined a traveling show at 12 as a trapeze artist, lion tamer, stable boy, and folk singer. And these roles did not begin to exhaust his versatility. In Istanbul, without resources, he created an ersatz Franz Lear operetta. On his way back to Vienna to freeload aboard a ship, he impersonated a singer and agreed to work his way home. He sounds like he's like in an old movie, but a scratchy throat prevented singing. Once home, he blackmailed people to keep their names out of a paper he edited and made money from others by giving them free publicity. Sounds like a real stand-up guy. Before World War I, he discovered the world of magic illusion, and in the army, he set himself up as a clairvoyant with considerable help from someone in the army post office. Whether or not he believed he really possessed extrasensory perception, he became a masterful hypnotist. He also learned how to douse for water and wrote a book for other magicians who wanted to put on mind-reading acts called The Road to Telepathy, Explanation and Practice. After the war, he wrote another, Thought Reading, a Primer for Telepathy, in which he gave invaluable advice to the neophyte magician. He said, "The illusion of the supernatural must surround him in the eyes of his audience, which will be 1,000 times more manageable when it has become a group of believers. With success, self-confidence rises, and with self-confidence, the power of persuasion itself." I wrote a star next to that, right? The more you can sort of stir these ideas and the supernatural and the belief in these things, the more prone your audience is to being hypnotized, right? By this time, he had changed his name to Eric Jan Hunessen and had created his own reputation for clairvoyance and other supernatural powers. Despite his confession, quote, "If I were to strip away all that is mystical or supernatural, if I were to show thought reading for what it is, we would arrive at virtuosity in the knowledge of audience psychology, linked to the meticulous study of procedures concerning ideomotor motions based on ideas rather than reflexes." End quote. Here, finally, was a man who employed the scientific method. Others less candid had paved the way for him. There is a natural affinity between magic tricks and fakerism, which believers had no will to discover. Many masters of wisdom were also accomplished magicians. Madame Blavatsky had been, and when she was discovered at her tricks, her disciples protested that this was what the public had driven her to. Interesting. As magicians from Houdini in the 20s to Milbourne, Christopher, and Randy. Randy, I got to do a show on him. If Roberta's still here, she knows what I mean. And Randy, in our own time, have demonstrated most, if not all, feats of clairvoyance can be duplicated by the magician, and to look at the catalog of magicians' equipment bears them out. The magicians, of course, resent the mediums because they feel the mediums are using the same tricks they do, and in fact, they have caught many of the most famous mediums in the act, so to speak. The stage magicians are using their skills and techniques to provide honest entertainment, and feel that the mediums, psychics, and faith healers are using those skills to gull, cheat, and sell false dreams and false hopes. What do you guys think? Is there a difference between these two? In 1931, Hanussen met Hitler, joined the Nazi Party, raised the swastika flag on his car, and befriended leading Nazi officials. Hitler knew the value of using men with Hanussen's gifts to publicize his image as a man of historic destiny. Yeah, they often believe in destiny, right? Hanussen put himself at the service of the Nazi cause in astrological forecasts published by his swastika-trimmed paper. He also sought to put the party in his debt by lending large sums to the SA leader of Berlin, Count Wolf Heinrich Helldorf. What a name! Let's look him up. Count Wolf. There it is. Why do they all look like this? They all look so sick and weird. All right. Are they really just all possessed by demons? What do you guys think? Okay. Count Wolf Heinrich Helldorf, an opportunist as impressive as Hanussen himself. Prominent Nazis attended fashionable seances, which Hanussen staged at his Palace of Occultism, and were pleased to listen to his cheerful predictions for the party. One that was not so cheerful will cause him to be remembered whenever the controversial Reichstag fire comes up. In February 1933, soon after Hitler was named Chancellor, Hanussen opened the Palace of Occultism to actors, actresses, and important members of the party. I wonder if we could get a picture of him, his Palace of Occultism. I don't see. But here's an image of the seance. At a midnight seance, in an atmosphere of garish splendor, embellished with gilded zodiac symbols and bugged with secret microphones to pry out intimate details from an unsuspecting audience, a common showman's trick which the Nazis were to use again in the fashionable brothel they instituted for important officials, German and foreign, Hanussen went into his trance. He said, "I see a vast and distinguished room. Portraits of prominent men of history hang on the walls. They are men who have led Germany through much agony. Are they not the chancellors of the Reich? Yes, this is the conference room of the chancellery. Noise penetrates through the windows. The storm troopers move down the Wilhelmstrasse. There has been a magnificent victory. The people want Hitler. Victory. Victory. Hitler is victorious. Resistance is useless, but the noise comes closer. Is there a struggle? Shooting? No, no, it is not that. I see flames, enormous flames. It is a terrible conflagration that has broken out. Criminals have set the fire. They want to hurl Germany into last-minute chaos, to nullify victory. They are setting fire to a large public building. One must crush this vermin. They want to resist Hitler's victory. Only the mailed fist of an awakened Germany can hold back chaos and the threat of civil war. The following evening, the Reichstag was in flames. The question as to who started the fire has not been resolved to this day. The suspicion that the Nazis themselves were implicated is strengthened by the fact that Berlin Police President Helldorf went directly to bed after hearing of the fire. It was still raging when the police arrested a Dutch communist who was found on the premises. The Nazis linked him with a communist plot which they failed to make stick, but the Dutchman was executed. Some people claim that Hanussen had hypnotized him into starting the fire. Hanussen had pledged himself, after all, quote, to be the first, if necessary, to devote everything I own and am, when the time comes, to make a sacrifice at the altar of Germany. I have encountered the readiness for sacrifice among all those who stood behind the banner of the national concept. I knew that Adolf Hitler sacrificed all for his national idea. I saw stormtrooper veterans in torn shoes and in thin jackets standing in the icy winds for hours to perform their duty. I have observed selflessness, integrity, and true patriotism among the millions who back Hitler, and so I had no choice but to demonstrate my respect and gratitude unhesitatingly, in spite of everything, to serve the truth. Whether or not Hanussen had advance notice of the fire, he probably assumed his prediction of it would assure his state as a prophet, or his stature as a prophet. It did not. 6 weeks later, he was snatched from the entrance to his theater by Helldorf's orders and murdered in the woods near Berlin. Helldorf, perpetually bankrupt, had borrowed money. So let's put him back on. Helldorf. Okay, so he's also broke. Perpetually bankrupt, had borrowed money from Hanussen, but whether this was the motivation for the murder or whether it related to Hanussen's knowledge about the fire is still a mystery. The fire augured well for the Nazis, on the other hand. It enabled them to do away altogether with the need for free elections under the guise of preventing an imminent communist takeover. Once firmly entrenched, the Nazis continued to call upon the services of soothsayers, even though official party was to harass and banish them. The astrologer, hi cat, you can't see the cat, but she just came out here. I guess she wants a snack or something. The astrologer Gerda Walter, in an article in Tomorrow entitled Hitler's Black Magicians, observed a complete lack of unity regarding occultism. Not only is there absence of coordination, but often there are different and even opposing points of view. As soon as Hitler came into the public eye, he was the target for astrological predictions. But after 1933, an astrologer tempted fate if he cast the Fuhrer's horoscope, and none were so bold as to dare. Right? Remember that woman from months and months ago who predicted that someone evil would destroy Germany, and she was basically right? And that was before, you know, the moratorium on this kind of thing. Fearing unfavorable predictions, and that's why he stamped them out. It wasn't because he wasn't an occultist. Many have made that argument. I think he just wanted his own cult to reign, right? His own cult of the occult. Fearing unfavorable predictions, Hitler decreed that police regulations equate astrology with fortune telling, and paragraph 2 read, quote, "For purposes of these police regulations, fortune telling is understood as a prediction of future events, the divination of the present or the past, and all other forms of revelation, not based on natural processes of perception. It specifically includes the reading of cards, the casting of horoscopes, the explanation of the stars, and the interpretation of omens and dreams." And indeed, if you look through different US states, similar things were happening. I think Pennsylvania fortune telling is illegal, even though we have them. I think it's not enforced. Anyway, as Himmler later confessed to Wilhelm Wolff, the reason for the strictures against astrologers was that if they were not Nazis, they might see their calling as universally applicable to all humans, whether they were Negroes, Indians, Chinese, or Aryans, in crass opposition to the Nazi concept of the racial soul. No one doctrine, argued Himmler, can cover all cases, but he left no doubt in Wolff's mind that he was committed to a belief in astrology and related occult studies. He told me about a few of his own experiences and observations in certain phases of the moon. His ancestors, he said, had been familiar with peasant lore, calculating the right time to plant crops. He began projects at certain but not generally known phases of the moon. He was fond of, I guess we're talking about Himmler. Yeah. Himmler was one of the most strident believers in all of this. He was fond of citing the important place of astrologers and fortune tellers in the court of Frederick the Great, right? He believed he was a descendant of, I think it was Frederick the Great, which we read in a previous chapter. A friend of Wolff's, Alec Howe, who was employed by the British Secret Service in World War II, discovered by reading astrological studies in Gestapo files after the war that Himmler was in good company. Wolff repeats his assertion that German astrology was supreme in the 1930s, and it engaged the attention of other important Nazis like Walter Schellenberg and Rudolf Hess. It was largely thanks to Hess that the so-called Witchcraft Act of 1934 against astrologers and occultists was circumvented. So anyone who tells you that, you know, Hitler was against the occult is pulling your leg, just is historically illiterate. Like I said, I think they wanted to crack down on this stuff, and they said it just now, right? It could be applied to other people, not just the becoming powerful race of the Aryans, right? That's what the danger was. When a former planetarium director on Alfred Rosenberg's staff in the Department for the Promotion of German Writing made an official declaration that astrology should be banned, Hess disagreed on the grounds that there might be something to it. It was this bias, some believe, which caused Hess to make the mysterious flight to Scotland. Oh, that was very humiliating for him. Howe reports in his book, Astrology, A Recent History, including the untold story of its role in World War II, that a confidant revealed to him, quote, "Hess's astrological foibles strengthened his own conviction that everything possible must be done and hazarded in order to end hostilities without delay, because at the end of April and the beginning of May 1941, Hitler's astrological aspects were unusually malefic. Hess interpreted these aspects to mean that he, personally, must take the dangers that threatened the Fuhrer upon his shoulders in order to save Hitler and restore peace in Germany. Time and again, Hess's astrological advisor had told him that Anglo-German relations were threatened by a deep-seated crisis of confidence. Indeed, at this time, there were very dangerous planetary oppositions in Hitler's horoscope. Hitler, although he publicly ridiculed the occult tastes of his disciples, was equally superstitious, and his chief architect and later Minister of Armaments and War Production, Albert Speer, related that he himself witnessed a number of instances of this, such as the occasion as when, let's look up our friend, not our friend, but let's look up Albert Speer here. Okay. And he said Hitler had solemnly laid the cornerstone for the House of German Art in Munich. He delivered the ceremonial hammer blows with a fine silver hammer, Troost had designed specifically for this day. But the hammer broke. Troost died 3 months later, and Hitler remarked to us, he said, "When the hammer shattered, I knew at once it was an evil omen. Something is going to happen, I thought. Now we know why the hammer broke. The architect was destined to die." Hermann Rosching, a leader of the Danzig Senate who fled Germany in the 1940, also attests to Hitler's occult leanings. In The Voice of Destruction, he writes, "One day, when Hitler seemed in an approachable mood, a far-sighted woman in his circle said to him warningly, "My Führer, don't touch black magic. As yet both white and black are open to you, but once you have embarked upon black magic, it will dominate your destiny. It will hold you captive. Don't choose the quick and easy successes. There lies before you the power over a realm of pure spirits. Do not allow yourself to be led away from your true path by earthbound spirits which will rob you of creative power." Hitler was fond at times of this sort of mystical talk. Only in such guise could any serious warnings be offered to him. This woman friend expressed in her way that everyone who came in touch with Hitler was bound to feel Hitler was abandoning himself to forces which were carrying him away, and I wrote possession near there. Forces of dark and destructive violence. He imagined that he still had freedom of choice, but he had long been in bondage to a magic which might well have been described not only in metaphor but in literal fact as that of evil spirits. So I put this question to my audience. Are these people possessed by demons? And instead of a man emerging step by step from the obscurity of his youth and freeing himself from its dross in his upward course, he witnessed the development of a man possessed, the helpless prey of the powers of darkness. Black magic, white magic, Hitler is the typical person with no firm foundation, with all the shortcomings of the superficial, of the man without reverence, quick to judge and quick to condemn. He is one of those with no spiritual tradition, who, being caught by the first substitute for it that they meet, hold tenaciously to that lest they fall back into nothingness. He belongs also to the type of German who is starving for the unattainable. For all those who had been unsuccessful in the battle of life, of National Socialism, is the great worker of magic, and Hitler himself is the first of these. Thus he has become the master enchanter and the high priest of the religious mysteries of Nazism. Hitler's henchmen make more and more play with this quality of supreme magician. After Hitler's rise, someone in Himmler's department was given an astrological forecast by a Swiss friend, Karl Ernst Kraft. Let's look him up. Karl Ernst Kraft. Okay. He was an astrologer with a predilection for the same sort of theories about the spirit of language and word magic which distinguished Guido von List. And I think there really is something to that, to be able to speak again with confidence and the belief behind your words, and to be somewhat poetic with language. We do that all the time in the United States. We take things and we give them labels to mean something that they don't really mean. So I think there's something there. So word language. Kraft was well versed in Latin, Greek, German, French, Italian, Spanish, Dutch, and English. He had used his astrological talents to forecast trends on the commodities market. Around 1938, he was living in the Black Forest with two women who were interested in Rudolf Steiner. Hitler appealed to Kraft as the conqueror of the mechanistic way of life. Kraft predicted to his friend that Hitler's life would hang in the balance between November 7th and 10th of 1939. During that time, Hitler attended an anniversary celebration of the 1923 Putsch in the Munich Hofbrauhaus. He left just before a bomb went off and tore apart the beer cellar. Kraft zealously wired Hess, thrusting his prediction under his nose and adding that the stars still indicated that Hitler would not be safe for a few more days. Kraft was prominently arrested. Himmler, meanwhile, was working on tracking down the failed assassin by interviewing a Viennese trance medium who had been ordered to his office. Goebbels, as propaganda minister, had more practical concerns. He just happened at that particular time to have developed an interest in Nostradamus, the 16th century French prophet. Everyone should know who Nostradamus was. I was pretty obsessed with him in middle school. I thought it was wild that this person existed. So Goebbels became obsessed with Nostradamus. He must have been delighted to find in Kraft a man who was not only familiar with Nostradamus's obscure verses, but who actually believed that Germany's triumph over the Allies and over future enemies as well could be deciphered from them. Kraft came to work for the propaganda ministry and began using his special knowledge of Nostradamus as a means of psychological warfare. Nostradamus had been deliberately obscure to keep his secrets from being understood by any but the initiated. The infinite permutations of possible interpretations had made his quatrains popular propaganda devices for centuries. Thus, Kraft had an embarrassment of riches from which to choose so as to interpret Germany's victory. Quatrain 376 presumably predicted the birth of National Socialism, and it said, "In Germany will be born diverse sects, approaching very near happy paganism. The heart captive and receipts small. They will return to paying the true tithe." Kraft was in deadly earnest when he interpreted a passage like the following to mean great discomfort for Great Britain. It said, "In the island shall be so horrid tumults that nothing shall be heard but a warlike surprise. So great shall be the insult of the robbers that everyone shall shelter himself under the great look." So let's look up Goebbels too, because we're talking about Goebbels. Goebbels' diary entry for November 22nd, 1939 reads, "This is a thing we can exploit for a long time. I forbid all printing of these forecasts by Monsieur Nostradamus. They must be disseminated only by handbills, handwritten or at most typed, secretly, and in the manner of snowball letters. The thing must have an air of being forbidden. Naturally, all this silly rubbish must go out to France." Right? So it was sort of a psychological operation he was enacting here. Let me see if anyone is chatting. Let's what's going on in the chats. You could go for some magnetic healing, some mesmerism. Yeah, I mean, if you believe it's soothing, it probably is. It is. It's all like that. I think that's why so many movies get made about the Nazis, because they're all these ridiculous characters. Yes, happy afternoon and happy December, Oswald. Um, nerdy little Nazis. uh, they look like that because they are racially superior, obviously. Yeah. Definitely possessed by demons. It seems that way, doesn't it? Daimons. When you get into witchcraft, demons will follow. Interesting. Bones are feeling sleazy head spinning around. Spend the night with Joseph Goebbels. Think I'm coming down. Kurt Cobain's roommate. I was listening to a Nirvana song yesterday. I don't know if they were possessed. All of them were possessed, but definitely influenced by demons. We're almost done this chapter. I'm gonna take a short break. I'm gonna put my water on again because I know you guys like it so much, and I will return in just a moment. All right. I have returned. I got your PM, Oswald, and I don't know anything about that. So if you have information that you want to send to me, and that goes to anyone in the audience, if you ever want to send me information, I do love reading email, and my email is available on my YouTube channel's page. So let's see. Let's try to finish this. Let's finish it. Let's put Goebbels back here. All right. Pamphlets of Kraft's interpretations were sent in advance of the military through occupied France and were highly successful in getting their message across. Kraft's exegeses were translated into many different languages, and the output was enormous. They were even surreptitiously stuck into people's pockets as they left the movies as far away as in Iran, according to Gerda Walter. Romania's minister to London, an anti-Nazi awed by Kraft's seemingly prophetic gifts, wrote him to renew an old acquaintance and ask for his astrological predictions about the war. Kraft showed him the letter to his Nazi superiors, and they drafted an answer predicting Germany's victory. When the Romanian minister received it, he assumed that Kraft must be advising Hitler and got the idea of convincing the British to hire the best astrologer they could and have him try to second-guess Kraft. If the British could get their astrologer to find out how Kraft was arriving at the sources for his advice, they could, first of all, know that what Hitler was thinking, and secondly, influence his thought by preparing forecasts similar to Kraft's, but pro-Allies, and slipping them into Hitler's hands. For the purpose Ludwig von Wohl was hired. Let's look up Ludwig von Wohl. Let's see who that is. All right. So pleasant looking. Look at this one. Oh my goodness. A Roman Catholic Hungarian author of religious books who left Berlin for London in 1935, he had a reputation among believers in astrology for his accurate horoscopes of Hitler, Mussolini, Churchill, Chamberlain, and other prominent people. One of Hitler in particular, cast in 1931, brought him to the attention of the international set. Just before the beginning of World War II, at a Spanish embassy dinner party, he entertained the British Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Lord Halifax, with astrological predictions and was assured that he would have a job if war broke out when he said it would, and if Hitler's invasion of Poland was as rapid as he predicted. The war was 3 days early. Ludwig von Wohl became a British citizen, changed his name to Louis de Wohl, and joined the British Army. In August 1940, an employee of the War Office came to him and asked, "How would you like to work on a highly secret assignment?" He liked it very much, made a captain, paid in cash, and set up in a suite at Grosvenor House. He worked on his unique task. British intelligence believed that Hitler was being advised not only by Kraft, but by 4 other astrologers, and that he never made a military move without their advice. Churchill was agreeable to the idea of trying to intercept what Hitler was being told every day. "Why not try it?" he said. "It could be fun." In allowing this bizarre appointment, Churchill assumed to be indulging, or he was assumed to be indulging one of his mischievous caprices. After all, he is reported to have said, "Why should Hitler have a monopoly on astrologers?" One commenter remarked that he may have also relished the idea of subjecting some stuffy, high-powered official to an astrologer's scrutiny. Since de Waal knew all 5 astrologers who were supposedly advising Hitler, had worked for some time with Kraft, and was familiar with his formula, he could guess what he presumed they were telling Hitler. In his first memo to the British War Office in the beginning of September 1940, he advised that the Germans would not invade England, because he was sure that Hitler's astrologers were counseling him against it. One of de Waal's tasks was to put out a bogus copy of an astrological magazine called Der Zenit, which looked exactly like the genuine article. It was intercepted by the Nazis, and Wolff relates that he told Himmler's assistant Walter Schellenberg that from an astrological point of view, it was a first-class production and indicated that it was work of experts. Some very skillful bits of propaganda had been casually inserted in an otherwise innocuous text. We deduce that this fake had been manufactured in England. Wolff was consulted several times by Himmler during 1944 and 1945, particularly as defeat seemed imminent. Wilhelm Hotel, who joined the German Secret Service in 1938, says of Himmler, his predilection for the occult sciences also went far beyond the confines of a harmless hobby. It can, with truth, be said that all his major decisions hung upon the service given to him by his clairvoyant. According to Hodel, Schellenberg, anxious to end the war, had Wolff draw up a horoscope, which would give Himmler the necessary courage and convince him that he was destined by fate to become the Führer and the savior of the German people. Not only Himmler, but the German people pinned their hopes on astrology. Speer relates that they had, quote, long since stopped believing the newspapers. There was one exception. During the closing months of the war, growing bands of desperate people began pinning their hopes on the astrological sheets. Since these were dependent on the propaganda ministry for a variety of reasons, they were, as I learned from Hans Fritsch at Nuremberg, used as a tool for influencing public opinion. Fake horoscopes spoke of valleys of darkness, which had to be passed through, foretold imminent surprises, intimated happy outcomes. Only in the astrological sheets did the regime still have a future. In 1945, the day after President Franklin D. Roosevelt died, Goebbels, who may have been a victim of his own propaganda, ordered champagne and phoned Hitler. My Fuhrer, I congratulate you. Roosevelt is dead. It is written in the stars that the second half of April will be the turning point for us. This is Friday, 13th of April. It is the turning point. Later, in Hitler's bunker, Goebbels sent for the horoscopes which had been cast for the Fuhrer and for Germany on his accession to the Chancellery. They had been given to Himmler for safekeeping. Both predicted the entire outcome of the war, the beginning in 1939, victory until 1941, then defeat until the second half of April 1945, when there would be a reversal of fortune. Peace would not come until August. Goebbels, who may have been humoring Hitler, drew historical analogies between the death of Roosevelt and the death of the Tsarina during the 7 Years' War with Russia, when Frederick the Great appeared to be defeated until the death turned things around. But in the end, all the prophets failed them, and the Nazis learned they could not be saved by the stars. I don't know if I should keep going. We only have four chapters left in this book. I think I'm going to probably stop there. I know I said marathon, but I think that has actually been kind of a marathon for me. And I can finish this tomorrow after I do some of my AI job. But it has been a couple of hours. So Oswald wants to know if I've come across anything about Otto Rasch or Raish. Not sure how to say it. Well, we can look him up now. And the answer to that is no, I don't know who that is. I mean, I wouldn't call this research. I'm really only reading this book. But I mean, there was the paper that I posted the other day because I was kind of interested in how the Italian fascists were linked to the occult, which they also were. And I think, the ties between kind of fascistic movements and the occult seem to be a pattern. So this is Emil Otto Rasch, who is a high-ranking German Nazi official and Holocaust perpetrator. So yeah, I don't know anything about this guy. He studied philosophy, law, political science, received doctorates in law and political economy. That's a very interesting part about all of this, is a lot of these people are very highly educated. And it's kind of like the occult belief of the profane versus the illuminated, which is why I guess it lends itself to fascism so well, is because there's a special group of people, right, the illuminated, who know all the secrets and know about everything and keep the rest of those secrets and all that stuff away from what they call the profane, right? And they want, like we read in the previous chapter, everyone to be illiterate and stupid so that they're highly controllable. So he was known as Dr. Raish. Became a lawyer. He joined some kind of anti-Semitic group before he joined the Nazi Party. But no, I haven't. Of course, they're not going to, because it's Wikipedia, they won't tell us anything fun about him and the occult. That would probably require some heavier lifting. Good to catch a live stream. Yeah, I'm glad. I know I guess I should finish this right now, but I don't think I feel like it. I think I have to do some more of my AI job. And if anyone needs to make some extra cash, you should go to Outlier and get yourself an AI job. You haven't caught most of the streams. They've been compelling. Yeah, I'm actually just reading directly out of this book from 1977, The Nazis and the Occult, even though there have been plenty of books written since then. But this is the book that I have concerning this topic. And I must have read it initially, maybe around 2020. And I guess I'm rereading it now for everyone in the audience here. And I guess it was initially called Gods and Beasts, but they took that part of the title out in the edition that I have. I have this edition here, 1977. It is pronounced similar to the skin rash because you're distantly related. Okay. Yeah, I don't know anything about him. I could do some more research on that. I hope everyone had a really nice Thanksgiving. Like I said, I've been making, I've been obsessed with sweet potato pie. And I learned how to make a pie crust the other day. And it's not as difficult as you might think. I think a lot of things, like within that cooking situation, aren't as difficult as you might think. So I hope everyone had a really nice holiday if they celebrated. I am yet again unemployed, so I'll be doing more of these live streams. I had a job for about a month and a half at a middle school over here, and I was filling in for a lady on maternity. But it looks like China, which would be, I think, very interesting for me. I think I could do a couple of years in China, make some cash. It's our education system has become very shameful. There's no discipline, there's no academic rigor. Let me look that up really quickly. Remedial math. I think it was UCLA, but I don't want the AI to do it. Here it is. Oh, and this isn't even new. This is from 2019. I read a more recent article, but you get the idea, right? College students, incoming college students can't even do remedial math. And that's because we have lowered standards to a complete obliteration. There aren't really any standards anymore. We don't fail people out. They just get pushed through. So we don't have academic rigor or standards. And our education system at this time is in a really, really bad state of affairs. There was also a policy change from teaching phonics, which we knew worked, to this thing called like whole words phonics versus whole language. So recently, I don't know what this article says, but so basically what happened was there was one woman who came in with this whole language, these sight word policies, and they decided to take that up instead of teaching phonics, which we knew worked. And it has really, I think, helped to create an incredibly illiterate population, which is really a shame. And it makes one wonder if this stuff is done purposefully. It's not difficult, but it does take a magic touch to make it great. You mean cooking, I think. Looking forward to catching more of my streams. Well, I'll be doing this more often until I move to China, or you might not ever hear from me again. I mean, that's not true. As long as I don't speak out against the party. But I'm actually thinking of if I get this, it'll be in Shanghai, which is kind of interesting. I was thinking of getting like an offline word processor and doing some writing, because life's short and I want to write things. And, here on YouTube, it's super fun, but people people will take your ideas, and you really have to write your ideas if you want any kind of credit for them. So I don't know. It's something I might be doing in the future here. Uh, so yeah, I was thinking about trying to find Nick Land and doing a documentary on him, because he's one of these people that I think people are feeling the effects of his philosophy, but people don't know who he is. But basically, the father of what we would call accelerationism. And I don't agree with a lot of things he says. I think he's kind of an awful person, but I also think he would make an excellent subject for documentary. So if you haven't heard of this is basically something that Nick Land came up with. And I guess Benjamin Boyce recently interviewed him, which I find very strange. I've always disliked Benjamin Boyce. According to the NHERI, about 6% of all school age kids in the USA are homeschooled. I could become his babysitter. Does he have children? I'm not interested in that, but did someone procreate with him? Boyce interviewed Land Dugan, and Land and Dugan together. Wow, this sounds like a conversation from hell if I've ever heard one. I can't stand Benjamin Boyce. I think it's just his face. That's how terrible I am. Maybe I'll check it out. I don't know. I'm too busy doing my stupid AI job. Oh, what's up? I'm about to end the stream. Should I not? Should I continue reading this Nazi book? I don't know. I'm tired. I can't read for longer than like 2 hours. But I should be back again soon. Maybe I'd like to read more of Days of Rage. I find that book super more 4 more hours. That's how long it would probably take to finish the rest of this book. What should I do? Should I read another chapter? I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I'll just do my AI job. Which involves, it's really pretty creepy. But I need the cash, so like not desperately, like I'm not broke, but it's nice to have some incoming, especially since I took a vacation in Philadelphia for Thanksgiving. Oh man, do I miss the Northeast. What's the job? Okay, so if anyone wants to make they used to pay better, but I think a lot of the projects were kind of difficult and people kind of didn't do well enough for them to keep doing them. They used to pay like 30 an hour for these. Now it's only 15 an hour. But all you have to do is stalk people on Instagram. So basically, what you do is you find a picture on Instagram, you put it into their little software thing, you tag the picture, you annotate the picture. So you put a tag on the person, and then you upload 3 more pictures of that person from their own Instagram, and then you tag all of their clothes, and you find you use the Google image capture thingy to find out where the clothes came from, and it's actually pretty accurate. Um, and so if you have the most updated version of Chrome, you can do this pretty easily. So yeah, you tag all of their clothes, you tag any kind of technology or other products that might be in the image, you tag the location. It's really, really easy. And it's a little creepy, but it's also kind of fun. I guess. I don't know. It's easy money, super easy money. So yeah, my interim maternity leave English teaching job is now finished, but I think that the Shanghai school seems very interested. So I could definitely do China for a few years if needed. They pay really well, and I think it would be an interesting experience to see what it is really like there. Um, yeah, just random people. You just find pictures of random people on Instagram, and then you annotate the image. Um, and if you said if I have your email, I can refer you if you're interested. They used to pay a lot more. I mean, I've done various projects for them. That's how I'm not super afraid of AI, because I know that there are still people like me on the back end, like training all of this stuff. Like, it is getting better, but um I think it's a bubble. I mean, I had an interesting, so just to like have a chill stream for a little bit. I had an interesting few conversations about AI with people at Thanksgiving who, it seems like tough times for a lot of people. They're out of work, and two of them are pursuing what they're calling master's degrees in AI, whatever that means. One seems to be from Georgia Tech, and the other one I think is going through Colorado University. And I've looked at Colorado University because it's one of those schools that does a lot of online programs, and I've thought about doing that for Masters of Ed, but I don't feel like paying money for that kind of thing. And I don't know what their program would entail. I don't know what a master's of AI means, but the one who used to be a philosophy professor who's out of a job, which I find deeply ironic and funny, by the way, because he's not a very pleasant person. But he's doing this master's of AI through Georgia Tech on like the kind of ethics side. And he said he was going to an effective altruism conference, and he thinks I'm an idiot. He thinks I'm very below him. Um, but he's going to an effective altruism conference. And if you're not familiar with that, like, it's basically like they are the vanguard. They believe themselves to be the vanguard of AI. And this looks like an interesting thread, actually. And what's interesting about that is it has offshoots. Like, you have what they call rationalism. And I don't know if you guys kept up with that Ziz cult, the Zizians, right? They were part of this movement. So I had to internally laugh when I heard that this ex-philosophy professor was going to attend an effective altruism conference. I wonder where it is. I wonder if I could get some tickets and like just run into him. That would be really funny. Let's see, when is the next conference? When is it? San Francisco, London. I don't know. I could email him. We're not very close, though, this person and I really actually dislike him a great deal. I think he's a snob. But yeah, I find it interesting that like people are trying to get into AI. It's something that I've warned about, but it's also something that I do sometimes for extra cash. I think it helps keep me grounded as far as understanding the limits of this technology and understand. Even Peter Thiel has called it a bubble recently. So, what exactly is effective altruism and why is it controversial? We'll end the show here after this. Um, so this person says they're looking for a basic rundown of the concept. Oh, let me put this back here. Concept and the controversy around it, not really up to speed. So I guess how did this thread get flagged? Institutional movement concerned with encouraging people to commit to promoting the good, as the good is understood according to a broadly utilitarian account, and to using considered measures of efficacy. It's a cult, in my opinion, of academics uh, who think they're at the vanguard of protecting the rest of the world from danger. But sometimes they turn into murderous cults like the Zizians here. This is just some weird stuff that I seem to look into in my free time. So I found that to be kind of interesting. How do they know your hours for the AI job? They make you download an app that tracks your hours for it. Test reel. Yes. There's a guy who writes about this. Test reel. Let me look it up. Who unfortunately is an idiot liberal, but he's one of the people that's yes, Emil here. Right. So Emil, I follow this guy on Twitter and he's a hopeless liberal. It's really sad actually, because he has some very interesting ideas when it comes to the rationalist movement and all of this stuff. I'm well familiar with him because I've gotten into fights with him on Twitter. And it's a shame because he has such interesting ideas, but he really lets his liberalism get in the way. And it ideologically kind of shades him, if that makes sense. Useful idea, you know. Yeah, I know all about it. Isn't that weird? I wish I didn't know about any of this stuff. Someone asked me why I changed my profile picture to the one that I have, not the one right here, but where it has me in this like bandana and like my one eye is covered, and it just reminds me of a simpler time before I was looking into any of this. I thought you were talking about Ziz and his cult of exercise bros who are always just mirroring each other's bodies. Are you making like a pun here? The Machine Institute of Learning or something? It's a useful acronym. It's like the same person came up with all those ideas. Well, I want to point out that transhumanism, or the idea of it, it's very old. And in fact, I was going to write a whole show about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and how it's against transhumanism, as well as the more, revolutionary aspects of life at the time. So yeah, I don't know. I should actually do it, but they're obviously interconnected. And like, but even before I heard of this guy, I knew that all of these things were interconnected. And it's interesting we're around the same age, and that's why he's hopelessly liberal, I think. But yeah, if anyone else wants to look into it, they can. He's made some very maddening posts on Twitter. And so I've looked at him, and then I've looked, of course, at Joe Allen, the tech writer for the War Room, who I believe is some kind of Gnostic. He would not tell me about his golden ring, which I found very strange. But yeah, I mean, the types of people I've interviewed, all sorts of, in my career as a small-time YouTuber, has taken me into some very interesting territories for sure. But I found it very interesting that someone I know is attending an effective altruism conference. And it seems it seems to be on point, on brand for this particular person who thinks of himself as smarter and more capable than other people, um, even though he doesn't have a job. And he refuses to take the AI jobs that I've just described because they're below him. So I find that heavily ironic and funny and on brand. But anyway, guys, I hope everyone's having an awesome time doing whatever they're doing. I will catch you on the flip side. I will be back. I want to finish this Nazis and the Occult book, and expect more things from me, because I also don't have a job right now, and that's okay, because I think everything's going to work out. I'm feeling pretty positive about stuff in my life. Yeah, catch you on the flip side. God bless. Take care.